So this is a really good book that you guys picked. When I was contacted to talk about this book, I remembered, so this is my fiance Heather. We're getting married on August 1st. This is relevant. I'm going to mention some things about our relationship tonight. She doesn't know some of the things I'm going to talk about. It should be interesting. But when I first met her 4 years ago when we were beginning our courtship, we had read 5 love languages together. And so it was a good chance for me to revisit this book, and it's got a place in my heart. It's also a very relevant topic in today's society, so I'm also happy that you guys are examining it, because I think that love has always been, but even more now, is being remolded in front of our eyes in public opinion. We see signs on TV or on Facebook or on Instagram that say, love is love, love wins. Everybody's talking about love, but I don't think too many people are talking about how to love. So I want to open with a question that I don't know if Makar and Bishoy covered, but is love a feeling? It's not?
It's a verb.
It's a doing. Okay.
Love is a person. God is love. Is a being.
Mm-hmm.
The ultimate being of that universe we live at.
Okay. It's a doing and it's a person. But love between people, is it a feeling? Like, how do you know when it's love? Anyone?
It's unconditional.
Okay.
Agape.
What I'm getting at is a decision. It's a choice. It's not a feeling. Common perception is that it's a feeling, right? I get all these warm butterflies and I love being around the person and I'm always happy, but it's not. It's a decision. It's a choice. So if it's a choice, then we should choose to learn what the other person's love language is. Because we should want to deliver love in the way that that person wants to receive it. So let's talk about love. How is love communicated? This is the purpose of 5 love languages. Okay. As of right now, you guys have covered, I think, all of them, except for the one that I'm going to talk about tonight. It's only one, so it's going to be a little bit shorter than all the previous lectures, because all the previous lectures were 2. So it's words of affirmation, I love you, you're beautiful, etc., etc. Quality time, spending time staring into each other's eyes. Receiving gifts, buying someone flowers, etc., etc. Physical touch can be a pat on the back, a hug. It's all done. So tonight we're going to talk about acts of service. Everyone speaks one of these 5 love languages. You've already heard this all already. The language which you most likely speak is most likely the language you want to hear. So, if you like giving hugs, you probably like to receive hugs. This is physical touch. And that's probably your love language. This is going to help fill your love tank. Have you guys talked about love tank before? This is a concept in the book. Does anyone want to take a stab at a love tank? What love tank is? It's a kind of a funny...
How much love can take in, like your capacity for love?
How much, yeah, capacity for love. That's actually really good, yeah. So love tank, everybody's got a love tank. Okay, love tank is kind of just picture literally a tank, and when you receive the love language you want to receive, that tank fills up and you become more of a satisfied whole person. The concept that he explores in the book, okay? So you're most whole when you have your love tank is full, when you hear the right love language, when you receive the right love language. Now, before we get into acts of service, there's one other thing I want to mention. This is not just for marriage. This is really for any love relationship. This one more than any of the other ones. So I want to talk about it, or as I talk about it tonight, I want you to all to think about C.S. Lewis's 4 loves, right? He described, in English, the English language is very poor, right? We only have one word for love. When in actuality, there's multiple words for love in Greek, because there's different types. So there's 4 that we're going to think about as we talk about acts of service. Storge, which is the love between family members. Philia, the love between friends. Eros, the love between spouses. And agape, the love between God and man. So it's not just about marriage tonight. I'm sure it was not in the past, but we're going to explore all 4 of these tonight in acts of service. I also want to mention that I'm happy to be doing this specific love language because this love language is my love language. You can take the assessment online. I did it 4 years ago, and I did it again in preparation for this talk. My love language is acts of service. Heather can tell you that for sure, 100% it's acts of service. Heather's love language is quality time. I can tell you that for 100% certain. So it's a good topic for me. So, what is acts of service? Anybody?
Actions being done towards you.
Actions being done towards you. Okay. You want to elaborate?
So acts of service. So you can do acts of service for someone. They can do acts of service for you.
But what is an act of service? You talked about doing it, but what is it?
Helping somebody in need.
Helping somebody in need?
Yeah.
What else?
Helping destitutes.
Okay. So I'm going to do it this way, and this is the way it's defined in the book. Doing things you know the other person would like you to do. It's seeking to please the other person by serving them. Expressing your love by doing things for them. So in short, it's doing stuff. Like that's just it. It's doing stuff for the person you love. So let's talk about it in marriage. So you must be thinking, right, doing stuff for the person, right? So maybe like vacuuming the floors. Can vacuuming the floor of a house really be an expression of love?
Yes.
Yes, it can. The key phrase in this love language is, let me do that for you. That's the key phrase. Anything you can do to ease the burden of responsibility on a person who speaks or likes to hear acts of service, anything you can do to ease the burden of responsibility on that person, you're talking their love language right there. That's acts of service. We're going to hit on 5 main points in acts of service, okay? Number 1 is, this is what I'm going to talk about. Number 1 is requests versus demands. Number 2 is dialects. Number 3 is criticisms. Number 4 is doormat and stereotypes. And number 5 is being careful. Okay? So, number 1, request and demand. There is a difference between a request and a demand. Example. Actually, does anyone want to give me an example of a request and a demand? Instead of me giving you a silly one?
Soda versus getting a soda.
Right, exactly. So get me a soda versus can you please get me a soda. That's a great example. I have Mina take out the garbage versus Mina, when you get a chance, can you please take out the garbage? They're 2 totally different things. Requests give direction to love, but demands stop the flow of love. Okay, so requests give direction to love, demands stop the flow of love. Demands can create resentment. Imagine being told what to do every single day, every single minute. You're going to resent that person. Requests can create opportunities. Can you please? Or we have time. You're creating the opportunity for that person to serve. An example for family. Okay, so this happened to me last week. Hey, Dad, are you going by the dry cleaners? Can you pick up my stuff? Right? Dad, here's the receipt for the dry cleaners. Pick up my stuff. It's silly, but it's important. It's these words that really matter. So I want us to think, do we make requests of God or do we make demands when we pray? An example of making a demand of God, get me into this school. Make me pass this exam. Make her compatible with me or make him compatible with me. These are demands. Or do we make requests of God? Father, this is what I think is right. Your will be done. So reflect on your own prayer life and your relationships with your family and your loved ones. So that's number 1, requests versus demands.
Would it really matter if I demanded or requested? come to couples or mother and son, yeah, that makes a difference. But when it comes to God, I mean, if I demanded something from him, would he get like, hey, you don't love me, or would he get like offended?
That's a great question. I think, Abuna, if you want to answer. It doesn't matter. Sorry? Sure.
Guys, there is a lot of chairs here.
Does it? It's okay. It's okay. The question was, does it matter if we make requests or demands of God? I mean, if we use the word please, for example, yeah. No, Abuna. No, please, Abuna, please.
Understand what the difference between demand is like giving an order, request is like begging. So when you stand in front of God, we think that we are in a position where we can give orders to God, or we beg from God. What do you think?
I'm not asking about that. I'm asking about how would God feel when I ask him, when I request something from him, or when I demand something.
How that feels?
When I'm talking to a friend and telling him, hey, take this stuff from me, or could you please do this for me? That's the difference. But when I'm talking to God, it's not the same. He's not going to be offended if I told him I want this, or get me to the school, or get me that job.
But there will be contradiction, because when you're going to pray our Father, you're going to tell him, your will be done. So as if whom are you kidding? Yeah, you're kidding God, or you're kidding yourself? If that's what you're insisting on, that's your demand. You cannot say, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So my will be done, and you better do it, or else. That's what it means. Understand?
The problem in God's attitude, the problem is in your attitude. God is not going to be offended by anything you do. God, in His holiness, is not going to be offended. But you're going to have the wrong idea about how to deal with God. That's you're going to be offended. انت اللي هتتعب. God, nothing is going to offend him. He's in His holiness. Nothing is going to offend him. Okay, even if you are atheist. But the way you talk to God depends on your understanding of your relationship between you and God. And that's exactly what Abuna is saying. Are you telling him, you do my will? While you're telling him, let it be your will, because I know your will is better to me. So the difference is in you, not in him. He's not, if you are asking, is he's going to be, how he feels, he's not going to be offended. Because again, you cannot do anything that can offend God. Sorry to tell you this.
I already know that. What I'm telling you is that I already know that. I'm asking you what's the difference between saying this and saying that.
It's in you. The difference, you, not him. The difference is that.
Very simple. Request. Good. God's not going to give it to me. As simple as this. And the answer would be received by not getting it. So I would understand God said no. You understand?
You got it. Let's continue.
Okay. So that's request demand. Number 2, dialects. Okay? So everyone who speaks acts of service, this love language, has a little bit of a different dialect. Okay? This could actually be applied in other love languages as well. What do I mean by dialect? Okay, here's a great example. In Spanish, if you speak mainland Spain Spanish, and you go to Argentina, the J's, their double L's become J's. So they hear and receive in a very different way. The same thing with our love languages, especially acts of service. There are different dialects. What do I mean? It has to do with priorities. if I prioritize having my lunch ready every single morning before I leave for work, and Heather does everything under the sun except for make my lunch before I leave for work, am I going to feel love? Though she may be giving other acts of service, is my love tank going to be full or empty? If I prioritize number one, this is the way you can show me you love me. Empty. Thank you. Not as full. Yes. There you go. Thank you. Give benefit of doubt to Heather.
It could be also that I would appreciate all the other things.
Right. Of course. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Or, for another example to use from my personal life, if Heather prioritizes planning August 1st, if she prioritizes planning the wedding, and I just want to play, well, that's not a good example, and I just want to do everything except plan the wedding, she's going to think I don't care. Her love also won't be full. So, an example for friends. If my friend prioritizes getting a ride to church over getting a ride to the movies, for example, and I always drive him to the movies, but when he comes to ask me for a ride to church, I say, sorry, I can't make it. That friend is not going to feel love. So these things can be applied in any real love relationship. Let me ask now, what is God's dialect? What is God's dialect for acts of service? What is His number one priority? What is the number one act of service that we can do to show love to God? Communication. So you're saying He's more words of affirmation, quality time, other love languages, but I'm talking about acts of service specifically. Worship, but praising. Okay. Bringing people to Christ. It says in John 14, if you love me, keep my commandments. So the next logical question is, what are His commandments? What would you say is the number one? We're not going to put it in, but if we had to put the number one commandment.
Love your neighbor. Love your neighbor.
Yes, you're missing the first half of it, but that's right.
Love God first and then love your neighbor.
You got it. Matthew 10 says, I lost it. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Now that leads me to the next question. Who's your neighbor?
Any human being.
That's right. So, in God's number one priority being love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, in that being His number one priority for acts of service, that means that we must learn each other's priorities so that we can cater to each other. Follow me? So that we can serve each other. We are all neighbors. It's interesting how that works. Okay, that's number two. Number three. This is an interesting one. This is listening to criticism. Okay? In order for us to learn each other's dialects when in a love relationship, listening to criticism, though it's the most used, it is the most ineffective way for communicating how we want to love, pleading for love. Okay? So if someone says to you, I hate how much time you spend on your phone. On a lot. I hate how much time you spend on your phone. What is that really saying? If you listen closely, it's saying, maybe, put your phone down and spend time with me. Right? Or if someone says, I can't stand living in filth. Serious criticism. It may mean, can you please consider vacuuming the house before I get home? So in the criticism, though it's tough sometimes to read, we shouldn't read it as criticism, we should read it as the person who's asking for love. Not all the time, but most of the time. Another point on this topic of criticism, what we do, and I'm going to talk about marriage specifically for a second. What we do for each other before marriage is no indication of what we will do for each other after marriage. So before marriage, I buy Heather flowers once a week. I wish I do this, but I don't do this. I buy Heather flowers once a week, okay? And I bring them to her job. After marriage, there's the mortgage, the baby, the house, and I don't buy her flowers except maybe once every 6 months. How do you think Heather's going to feel if she prioritized receiving flowers and she enjoyed receiving flowers, and all of a sudden, come August 2nd, I don't buy her flowers until 2 years? She's not going to be happy. Her love tank is going to be empty. So it's important to remember the acts of service that we did while in love. This feeling, remember how I said love is not an emotion, it's not a feeling, it's a decision. Pre-marriage, it is typically an emotion that leads to a decision. Okay, so it's important to remember the acts of service that we did while in love and how it was received, so that after we get married, or after you get married, you can continue doing some of those things. It's also important to listen to our parents and friends. Okay, in their criticism, there is true value in understanding what they are really saying. Okay, so if your mother says, you go out with your friends too much, okay, this may really mean, I feel like you don't spend any time with me. Here's a question. Does God criticize us? Criticize us. Nudge? Yes.
Criticize the Pharisees, at least from what I saw in the Bible all the time. For all the called hypocrites of this and that. I see
He criticized the Pharisees. That's correct. He did criticize the Pharisees. Do you think he criticizes us? We're not that much different. I think
We criticize Peter when he couldn't take
it's a perfect example. That's actually a very, very good example. Allow me now to say that I agree. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Kamel?
I'm free.
So while this is actually very interesting points, and maybe Abuna, if you want to talk about this, because it's very interesting. I didn't even think of that. But I feel like God corrects and adjusts more than he criticizes. Because I don't know. What do you think, Abuna?
Revelation 2 and 3, where God was giving messages to
The church.
churches or the leaders of the churches, and he commended them for things.
Yeah, and he criticized
most
them.
of the churches he criticized them for other things.
Right.
But in love and care and in a way that would encourage them not to make them feel bad, but to help them what to do. He told them also what they need to do.
Right.
So he talked about the positive, the negative, and a way to solve the negative. That's God's way. I take it from this example.
Right. He gives us solutions, a way to fix. It says in Proverbs 3, "Son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor detest his correction. For whom the Lord loves, he corrects, just as a father does to the son in whom he delights." So it's safe to say yes, he does.
Yani there is a higher rule, which is the correction.
Right. Yes. Number 4. So number 1 we had. Number 1 we had request and demand. Number 2 we had dialects. Number 3 we had criticism. Point number 4, doormats and stereotypes. All right, let me just start off by saying this blanket statement. It's a truth. Nobody deserves to be a doormat, okay? Being a doormat, what does that mean? It means being manipulated by guilt. If you were a good spouse, you would do blank. Or fear, you will do this or you will pay, right? It's not love, it's not a language, it's just not acceptable. The best response, if you feel like you're being treated like a doormat, is, I love you too much to let you treat me this way. It's not good for you or for me. I love you too much to let you treat me this way. It's not good for either of us. I think this happens most often in families and friends, okay? Father may say to his daughter, if you were a good daughter or a good son, you would. Or a friend says, I need you to be a good friend, and I need you to lie for me. What about God? Okay, do we treat him like a doormat? Sometimes we may say, if you loved me, you would blank. Or if you were a good God, you would heal my friend of this sickness. It's attempt at manipulation. It won't happen, but it's an attempt at manipulation. Look at it the other way now. What about all the acts of service God does in our life that we forget and disregard? Isn't it the same thing as treating him like a doormat? A doormat, it's something that sits right in front of your door. You step on it, you clean your feet, you go inside the house, and you forget that it ever existed. Do we do the same thing to God? Does he give us blessings? Does he just pour out blessings in our lives? And we continue to disregard him and his presence. That's being a doormat. Okay, the other half of doormats, point 4, is stereotypes. It's a big deal in our society specifically, and one that I personally struggle with. If you asked me like 6 or 7 years ago who's responsible for the cooking and the cleaning in the house, I would say it's the wife, it's the woman. But that's not really the case anymore. Okay. Shocker to all the men in the room. Let me open your eyes. It's really not the case.
Depends.
It depends. Yeah, it definitely depends. If you ask me who's responsible for working the hardest or who brings home the most money, it's the man. Also not necessarily the case. Sometimes, please listen closely, sometimes a wife whose love language is acts of service, she may prioritize washing the dishes. Ooh. Good luck to that husband, right? You're going to be washing a lot of dishes. But that's a point that we need to consider, that just because it's typically in our minds a female or male gender role, it goes both ways. It's not just about men to women, it's also women to men. Just because we think in our minds this is a woman's job or this is a man's job, it's not necessarily the case anymore. So you have to be receptive and be able to flex according to your partner's priorities, dialects. I just want to say briefly also on this relationship with God, I think we stereotype God all the time. We often think of him as, his role is a genie or a friend, right? But he is first and foremost our Savior, before he's anything else. And that's the perspective from which he bestows acts of service on us. Point number 5. This is being careful. This is my last point. Laziness. This is one of those love languages. It's probably the most sensitive love language because it's so easy to get an A+, and it's so easy to get an F, but there's not a whole lot of room in the middle. Okay, so you have to be really careful with people whose love language is acts of service. Laziness, broken commitments, and making more work for them tell the other person that their feelings don't matter. Okay? So if, for example, you promise to do something for another person whose love language is acts of service, and you neglect to do it, or you delay in doing it, the person may become disappointed. So if it can get very dicey, right? Because if you ask your friend to take your clothes to the laundromat and to do them and bring them home that night, and they're not at home at night, and they come in the morning, you're gonna be a little disappointed. Okay, so it's very sensitive love language. Or if you commit to being somewhere and you don't show up, there's total failure, in acts of service. Also, doing things just because, kind of just doing it, or for the show of it, or to make a spectacle of it, it's also a really terrible idea. We're also told in Matthew 6 this very thing, right? It says, "Take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen by them, otherwise you have no reward from your Father in heaven." So we're told very specifically. So be careful, okay? Don't perform acts of service for show, for your own glory, or half-heartedly. It's not going to cut it. God the heart. All right, so to recap. Number one, there is a difference between a request and demands stop the flow of love. Requests provide opportunities to show love. Number two, everyone whose love language is acts of service speak their own dialect. They may prioritize taking out the garbage over changing the baby's diaper. Okay, make sure to speak the dialect of the one who's listening. Number three, how to determine the other person's dialect? Listen to their criticism. Hopefully there isn't any, but listen. In the critiques, there is very valuable information on how to meet their needs. Number four, don't be a doormat and don't treat people like doormats. Don't stereotype and be prepared to go outside your comfort zone for the men and Number five, be careful. Don't perform acts of service for show, half-heartedly, or for your own glory. All right, a couple of last things. There's two perfect examples, more than that, but there's two perfect examples of acts of service in the Bible. Okay, the first one, when the group of friends lower their paralytic friend through the roof to lay that friend before Christ so that the Lord healed him. Clearly they knew his dialect, that the man's number one priority was to be healed. Okay? And they helped make that very thing a reality. Imagine now this group of friends. Do you think that the paralytic man said to them, please do this for me? I don't know. I don't think so. It's an assumption. We're not told in the Bible. I can't imagine that he did. I think they did it on their own. But if he did, would he have said, you three, over the roof? I don't think he would have done that. He probably would have been like, listen, please help me out. I'm in really bad shape. But let's say, I don't think he even asked. It was because of their faith and their act of service that our Lord Jesus Christ healed the man. All right, that's a real, true act of service, bringing someone and laying them before the feet of Christ. The ultimate act of service, goes without saying, the ultimate act of service, the ultimate act of love was Christ's death on the cross for us and his resurrection. Because it was through that act, that specific act met our exact need and abolished the enemy, death, forever. It's not like a one-time thing. This was a permanent solution. There was also an amazing act of service, is just a third one, an amazing act of service when Christ washed the disciples' feet. I just want to think about this for a minute, how dirty their feet must have been. Like, I think we underestimate the level of dirtiness of their feet. It sounds funny, but I really want us to think about it. Like, they walk everywhere in sandals. Maybe not even sandals, who knows? They walk everywhere in sandals. It's not paved roads, okay? Days they go without washing their feet. Now imagine what their feet look like. Just think to yourself, would I have washed their feet? Would I have gotten down there and taken off the rag and looked at their feet and said to myself, not this one, maybe the next one. That crossed the threshold, man. You got to take care of that. I don't know. It's something to think about. He didn't do that. Regardless of their feet, he washed it. Last point I want to make. Just learning each other's love languages and speaking them, that's an act of service. Because it's serving the person in their needs. So if you learn, it's our job, when it comes to our neighbors, our family, our friends, and God, most importantly, to speak the love language. When it comes to God, of course, the relationship is a little bit different, but to speak the language that they want to hear. So just learning your neighbor's love language and fulfilling it, that's an act of service. Any questions?
Can anybody be creative in love language? Or should it be just imitate and copy? Because I believe if you have real love, you're going to be creative of that language automatically. Okay? And what we need is to feel not just a recorder or a robot. You authenticity.
Yeah. I think so. It's also we're all products of nature and nurture. You know, if we were raised in environments, and I think that's what the book is getting at, is if we were raised in environments where our parents always said, "Good job, Habibi. Good job, Habibi. Good job, Habibi. I love you so much. I love you so much." And then we grow up and we get into more serious love relationships with friends and family, and all of a sudden, you know, Mina's not telling me, "I love you. You look beautiful every other day." Then I'm, Mina, what's wrong with you, man? Like, come on, man. I today, or I love you so much. Like, why aren't you saying that to me? It's gonna be awkward. And so the purpose of the book is to train ourselves into knowing that there's way more than we think to how we communicate love. But you're right, it should be done from the heart. If it's not done from the heart, it means nothing.
So before we acquire that language, we better acquire love.
You better acquire a relationship with God.
That's what
That's gonna
Right.
overflow in love.